Today's episode of the Majority Report is brought to you by Gun Violence Awareness Day. Tomorrow, in honor of National Gun Violence Awareness Day and the start of Wear Orange Weekend, people around the country are coming together with a simple message. There's more we can do to end gun violence. Each year, every Town for Gun Safety and a broad coalition of partners call on Americans to wear orange and recognize the more than 90 lives cut short by gun violence every day and demand action toward a future free from gun violence. Join the movement by wearing orange tomorrow, June 1st, and post your picture online using the hashtag #WearOrange to show you're committed to ending gun violence.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder. It's time to look in the mirror, America. Do you like what you see?
I keep referring to Obama as the magic Negro.
Do you like what you see now?
Well, suck on this.
It's just a mirror, America.
Shared sacrifice by everybody.
What could it do to you except reflect your image?
I did nothing wrong at the Minneapolis airport.
The Majority Report.
Far more credible to me than PBS and Frontline.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Wednesday, May 31st, Thursday, May 31st, 2018. My name is Michael Brooks on a Michael Thursday. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We're broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On today's program, Eric Levitz. He's an assistant editor and writer for New York Magazine. We're talking about why unions are good. More research demonstrating what everybody should already know and the political solutions necessary for a democratic future, plus the real estimate of the death toll in Puerto Rico. And shockingly, Purdue, the drug company, they knew about opioid issues going back to the 1990s. Shocking. Who'd have thunk it? Also, Donald Trump is bragging about the economy and going to have fun on a trip to talk to the victims of mass shootings on the West Coast. That's an interesting use of the word fun.
It's going to be great.
It's going to be great. Brazil's imprisoned political prisoner, former President Lula, still maintains a lead in that country's presidential elections. The Virginia General Assembly approves a Medicaid expansion that will cover 400,000 low-income residents. Top North Korean officials are set to meet with their American counterparts, and why new statistics show that the government is keeping more quote-unquote lost migrant children than had previously been disclosed. Trump is remaking federal policy with regards to women's reproductive justice, even as Ireland moves forward in a historic repeal of that country's criminalization of reproductive rights. The Federal Reserve votes to ease a rule aimed at preventing big banks from making risky financial bets. That always works out well. And the new NSC chief of staff is from a group that believes that Muslims are plotting to take over the United States. How did they find out? That's what I want to know.
Best people.
As a Muslim. Trump plans to impose metal tariffs on some of our closest allies. And Italy's political crisis, a gut punch for the Eurozone project. Plus, Texas governor lays out school safety plans in the wake of the Santa Fe shooting. Of course, none of those plans have anything to do with, like getting guns out of potential school shooters' hands, obviously. Probably just more securitized, criminalized schools. What's up, everybody? We're all here except for the 4-day-a-week man. The whole crew on target.
Be nice if there was a stop, drop, and roll for school shootings.
Right. That's what we need. That's the type of solution-oriented, non-ideological thinking that we need to really take on problems, Matt. And I appreciate you finally bringing that to this show because this show is very ideological. I like how somebody said the other day, oh man, I forget where, on Twitter or something. They were like, you guys like attack Elon Musk, Jordan Peterson, and Sam Harris. You're like anti-YouTube. I was like, yeah, it's true. Takes a lot of brass to attack a histrionic, insane, self-help fascist, a whiny, atheistic, racist, and a glorified government contractor who wants to threaten the free press. That's what we do every single day on this show.
We're reappropriating YouTube.
Hell yeah. Donald Trump is reappropriating the presidency, and here he is at a tarmac. He's getting ready to go on a trip, I believe, is it to Texas, to speak to people who are the victims of a recent school shooting. And check out, there's a lot going on in this clip. First, though, is he finally, I mean, he's never going to be bored of bragging, period, but he's definitely getting bored of bragging about how much he's crushing the economy.
And he's actually making some comments. Let's listen.
Seeing what's in the letter, but it's very important to them. So they'll be probably coming down to Washington, D.C. on Friday for the delivery of a letter. I look forward to that. Other than that, the economy is good. Stock market's up. A lot of jobs. Best unemployment we've had in many, many decades, actually. And we're going to Dallas. We're going to Houston. And we're going to have a little fun today. Thank you very much. What's the letter going to say, sir?
So basically, he just was like, yeah, whatever. More people have boring jobs with bosses who apparently actually pay their paychecks. Whatever. I'm crushing it. I'm getting bored of talking about the economy. And then we're going to go speak to some people who are just victims of school shootings where we'll have some fun.
That's kind of like when your mom asks you how school was, and you're like, it's fine, it's good.
It's like, I've been getting many, many A's. It's been great. The teachers love me. There's been a lot of A's. And
what'd you do at the sleepover?
Played. Had fun. We played video games. It was great. We're moving forward. I think we will have many more sleepovers. Now, if I go to my room and masturbate, thank you.
How many times do you think he's going to brag about winning the election in his tour of shooting victims?
Yeah. You know, tough things happen. Like your friends get shot, and I thought we were going to lose. And then we won. By the way, here's a map. It'll help cheer you up. shows kids just survive. His electoral.
Tough, but this will calm me down. Look at this map.
Yeah.
It calms me down.
Look at this map.
He's literally going to do that.
It's self-soothing. Does everybody want to share in a self-soothe? Now I realize that not everybody has a daughter like Ivanka. So. Oh, you don't have daughters yet. Maybe you will. We got to do just a brief yeah, whatever. The economy's crushing it. A lot of devils and new jobs, blah, blah, blah. Anyways, we're going to go off and talk to some kids who got shot. Have some fun. Later.
Newtown, maybe get some ice cream.
Yeah, we'll go to Newtown. It's fun. It's a cute little Connecticut town. I didn't realize how robust downtown was over there. So, yeah, we'll have some fun. And, yeah, a lot of new jobs, whatever.
Maybe someday you'll have a daughter as hot as Malia.
See the way she's aging? Come on, man. Let's be real. Or it could be like now. It's like, yeah. Democracy's coming apart at the seams. My signature achievements are getting chipped away at every day, but Netflix deal. Holla. Yeah, that is. It isn't far from the truth, but I don't. What is he supposed like?
No, I agree with
if he was injecting himself, it would only what Obama's meticulous. Like he's gonna. By the time Obama fully relaunches his national presence with we're better than that speeches, even some of the most hardened, most despicable people in the country are just gonna be like, I kind of miss that black guy. He's just gonna time it so perfectly that by the time he's in the 2020 campaign stretch, being like, "Gotta get out of the ditch, everybody, because we're all Americans." People, it's gonna be like Stormfront guys being like, things just felt a little bit calmer when he was president. All right, guys, we're going to take a brief break. But before that, I got to tell you once again. Sorry, what was that? Today's show is brought to you by Gun Violence Awareness Day. Tomorrow, in honor of Gun Violence Awareness Day and the start of Wear Orange Weekend, people around the country are coming together with a simple message. There's more we can do to end gun violence. Show your support by wearing orange and posting a picture using the hashtag #WearOrange. Orange is the defining color of the gun violence prevention movement. And each year, every town for gun safety and a broad coalition of partners call on Americans to wear orange for National Gun Violence Awareness Day and recognize the more than 90 lives cut short and hundreds wounded by gun violence every day, and to demand action toward a future free from gun violence. Join the movement by wearing orange tomorrow, June 1st. And don't forget to post your pictures using the hashtag #WearOrange to show the world you're committed to ending gun violence in every community. You can also go to every town's website, www.wearorange.org, to find an event for Wear Orange Weekend of Action. Together we can stand up, speak out, and wear orange to raise awareness about gun violence. We will be right back with Eric Levitz on the Majority Report. Welcome back to the Majority Report. I'm Michael Brooks. Joining us now is Eric Levitz. He's a political writer for New York Magazine's Intelligencer. Eric, thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Eric, you have a new piece out, Unions Are Not a Special Interest Group, and you go over recent research on how unions are really essential for all the things that I think, those of us who sort of pay some attention to these things already have a sense of, raising wages, improving benefits, job security, and also that they have a disproportionate benefit for people of color and for women. But I really like the frame of that because there is this incredible false equivalency of talking about labor action as being analogous to, corporate special interests or other narrow areas. Can you explain why you would not consider unions to be a special interest group?
Yeah, sure. Well, so basically, individual unions can at times be a special interest group in the sense that they have interests that are, conflicting with the general public to the broader good. Mm-hmm. So, a police union that is trying to protect its members from accountability when they shoot criminal suspects or just any random African American. That's obviously a situation where the union is against the general public, and similarly, more sympathetically with coal miners who are trying to defend their industry that fundamentally needs to go, or to shrink massively quickly. They are in tension. But organized labor as an institution, more broadly, and the reforms that it wants, which apply to all unions, in that capacity, they are not a special interest group because we have reams and reams of research to suggest that their interests ultimately are the average ordinary worker's interest, whether that worker is in a union or not. We now have lots of research demonstrating that, the private sector unionization rate in the United States negatively correlates with inequality and positively correlates with labor's share of productivity, that when the private sector unionization rate is high, wages are higher for workers, whether they are unionized or not. And then, another wrinkle on this that this new study was able to really put some light on was there was kind of this idea that unions, while they were, good for workers who were in them, that workers who most benefited from unions tended to be higher skilled and tended to be more white. And so it was kind of shifting. What unions were really doing was redistributing wealth among workers, and actually in a regressive way from more vulnerable workers to less vulnerable workers. And the study blows that up, one, by demonstrating that it was lifting wages for all workers, but secondly, by showing that when unions were at their peak, actually they were disproportionately African American and disproportionately low skilled. And the benefits that they provided to African Americans were greater than whites. Unions fundamentally work as a way of insulating individual workers from abuse by their employers. And because African Americans in the mid-century United States were so vulnerable to abuse by their employers, the wage premium that they enjoyed when they had a union was larger than for any other group.
You also there's also myth busting here on higher unionization rate did not correlate with slower economic growth under any of the models that researchers applied. Yeah.
I mean, is it possible theoretically that under some circumstances that unions may have a slight negative effect on growth? That, maybe, but growth, growth matters to the extent that the gains of growth are going to ordinary people and not just collecting in Jeff Bezos' bank account. And so it is pretty clear that if there is a negative effect on growth, it is not substantial enough to offset the gains in equity that unions have produced.
I mean, as I say, I think research like this is obviously very important. It confirms a lot of, what you probably would know if you were attuned to a couple of basic sort of historical or policy questions and awareness of, just some sort of very basic facts about power, about the economy, about how things like everything from a minimum wage to the weekend to the elimination of child labor were, achieved. They weren't magically bestowed by, generous corporate sector. They were earned through, literal assertion of power in the labor sector. But, unions seem like it's one of those areas where the mythology is so deep around them, and the fight against them has taken, so many fronts since the sort of backlash starting in the 70s and obviously accelerated and deepened from the 80s through the present, on everything from, state attacks on public sector unions to the, devastation of private sector unions across the country. And there still seems to be a lot of sort of public propaganda that, the union isn't the one that ensured that we don't live in sort of like a, Blade Runner society or whatever, and we kind of do, but that it's really like, those are the guys who stand on the road and, collect money for no-show jobs, and then insert mafia joke here. So how important do you think is this research with the kind of broader just sort of communications war? Because so much of the attack on unions is a combination of raw power moving against unions and just incessant and relentless propaganda.
Yeah, I think that I think that unions, the public perception of them and the perception of them within the Democratic Party has really shifted in recent years. Fundamentally, to the extent that there was any kind of popular backlash against unions, it was rooted in the experience of the 70s where you had unions who had contracts where their wages were tied to increases in inflation. So workers who were in unions were insulated from inflation, and workers who were outside of it, arguably the union contracts were driving up prices even worse for them. And so there was actually some basis for resenting unions in that peculiar economic circumstance. Mm-hmm. In today's circumstances, where you have massive inequality that is hurting all workers and unions are virtually powerless, there's no real case to be made that unions should not be aided, or that the average worker does not have anything that the average worker is being disadvantaged by the unions, and that the average worker would not benefit from their expansion. And so you see, with every leading Democratic candidate endorsing very aggressive labor law reforms. So there is an ideological turn. The question is, the fundamental problem for labor has been, to a large extent, the U.S. Senate, the fact that labor did not expand into the South. It did not get too far into the West in terms of the private sector. And so you have a lot of senators, Democratic senators, even if you get rid of the filibuster, have only 51 votes, you have a lot of senators who come from states that don't have a strong labor movement, but every single business in that state that they're accountable to does not want progressive labor law. And so there's no interest to counterbalance, all of the businesses that fund them. Every industry doesn't want this, and you have no labor movement countering that, and that is why labor law reform keeps dying in the Senate under multiple Democratic administrations now. It's so in the party's long-term interest, so in the nation's interest, that you would hope you could just elect a senator who does the right thing regardless of the internal pressures. But this is a problem that they've had previously, and I don't know whether or not it's going to take a lot of activism in organizing to overcome that problem should Democrats take back power.
Well, I'm wondering on two different threads here. And on one hand, adding further pressure, obviously, are things like the Janus case that's coming, recent, rulings by the Supreme Court that have been, even more significant structural attacks on labor. But then on the other hand, and obviously we've talked about and celebrated, the teacher strikes, and they are happening in red states. Does that potentially actually both of those things in different ways potentially start to change that political calculus, you think?
Yeah, I don't know. I hope so. I think that the teacher strikes, I see that as most immediately, really challenging the GOP's fiscal regime on the state level, where you've got this somewhat untenable situation where the average Republican voter fundamentally does not support the fiscal priorities of the people that they elect. And so long as, the cultural resentment and the partisan identification is so strong in a lot of these red states, that doesn't, so long as, nobody within the party makes that a problem, it's not a problem. But you're starting to see with these teacher strikes, there's some, self-identified conservative teachers out in these picket lines. And in Kentucky, last week or the week before, you had a GOP primary where a protege of Mitch McConnell, who is the House Majority Leader in Kentucky, lost a primary to a teacher who was, making the incumbent support for pension cuts and education cuts a major issue in the campaign. So I see some promise in terms of reforming the politics of these red states, and maybe that carries over into support for unions more broadly, but we'll have to see.
Let's just touch. We're going to get to Puerto Rico in a second, but let's actually just touch briefly on you. You wrote a very good piece on one of the one of the main enemies of this show, and one of the main gurus of YouTube, Jordan Peterson, and you focus specifically on this talk of equality of opportunity versus outcome. Now, I have a lot of problems with that generally because it doesn't really mean anything when you drill down into it. And I think you can't really ensure certain equality of opportunity without certain equalities of outcome, frankly. But that being said, you did a great job, and please elaborate on sort of, debunking the idea that we're in some type of collectivist moment. Obviously, that's just insane from a policy and reality and political perspective. But what do you make of we spend so much time on the cultural resentments and the sort of contradictory politics that you just identified in the red states that motivate some of the Republican base. I think there's an overlap, but the Jordan Peterson kind of audience is a bit different. There's a certain affluence to it, maybe. There's a certain self-helpedness to it. I guess maybe debunk his argument, but also like, why is it, do you think, that especially at a time like this, when nothing could be further from the truth, that this argument is so resonant?
Yeah, well, I mean, Jordan Peterson is a complicated phenomenon, and I don't want to speak to all of it because a lot of different issues are wrapped up in that. But I do think that
emphasis on the word issues. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. This particular aspect of his thought, in the way that it's echoed by people like Joe Rogan, Ben Shapiro, the intellectual dark web, the existence of that term in our discourse. To me, I think that all reflects the fact that right of center intellectuals in the Trump era have a much easier time critiquing the extremely online left or than actually like defending what's actually going on in the political economy and the Trump administration. And they don't really have an argument for policies, but they do have some left-wing people who annoy them on Twitter, and they blow this up into like a totalitarian ideology that they are bravely condemning every other week or every other day in the New York Times. And so I think that's the Peterson's thing shtick is a part of that. But the argument on piece is that Peterson, a lot of other people, they have this whole thing about railing against equality of outcome, and which is really a bizarre thing to spend your time arguing against at a time when America's economy is like at Gilded Age levels of inequality. The average CEO makes like 144 times the average worker. Black households have 12. White households own 12 times more wealth than the median black household, et cetera. But where it comes from is that there is this sort of pendantry about the gender wage gap. So progressives online will, present disparities, racial gender disparities, and present them as though they are tantamount to evidence of social injustice. And there's this resentment, connected to like the James Damore thing, and from this segment of right-leaning STEM sort of men who are like, it's a fallacy to suggest that just because there aren't as many female engineers as male engineers, that this means that there is a gender discrimination. Like people can just have differences. There are biological differences between the sexes. The average man is taller than the average woman. Why couldn't the average man be more interested in engineering than the average woman? And from this, they extrapolate that the left isn't just interested in lessening gender inequalities in pay, but that actually philosophically they believe in equal outcomes, and they are committed to this totalitarian Marxist ideal of everybody in a just society would have exactly the same skills and qualities and money, which is totally baseless. What I point out in the article is that fundamentally this isn't an argument about equality of outcomes. I don't actually know any feminists who believe that as soon as we get rid of the patriarchy, there will be women starting at middle linebacker in the NFL. And I don't actually even know that many socialists who literally believe that after the revolution, we should have everybody having the exact same material goods. Most, I think, tend to believe that you need some sort of incentive structure to reward the people who, someone's got to clean the toilets after the revolution, and they better get rewarded, disproportionately from the people who are, whatever, podcasting.
Eric, there is another scenario about who cleans the toilets after the revolution, and there's some sort of, slightly, I don't want to elaborate on that. I'll save that for my other show. Go ahead.
But the argument is really about equality of opportunity, and what the most progressives are doing when they suggest that the gender pay gap obviously reflects institutional sexism is they aren't necessarily saying that like in a perfect world there would be exactly 50% male, 50% female in mechanical engineering or whatever, but that there are demonstrable biases throughout our society. We're living in a culture that until 1993, it was constitutionally allowed And it was legal in multiple states for men to rape their wives. They could not be prosecuted for that because once entering the marriage contract, they had full reign to their wives' body.
Right.
So, this is where we live, and there's plenty of empirical research demonstrating the way that the legacy of patriarchy affects and pervades, relations in the workplace. The, basic stuff like how, men will perceive that women are dominating a conversation when they're actually talking less than they are. Lots of stuff like this. And then, of course, there's the whole fundamental inequities in our system of, social reproduction, the amount of reproductive labor that women do in terms of housework, childcare that goes uncompensated, and that it's assumed that they will take care of, and that our entire economy relies on them performing that uncompensated work, et cetera. So, the situation is even more stark with race, which they, translated over to. But, it just
right.
kind of sort of.
Right. Yeah. Race is the next, and that's when you need to start bringing back, social Darwinism and pseudoscience. But I think that there's two just points that I just want to button on that briefly. I mean, one that's I think is actually really interesting is I think in some ways you could almost actually, really flip the tables on, especially, the sort of obsession with kind of gender orders and stuff like that, because you can actually say we won't really have any idea what aspect of the conversation is actually about, science or actual gender differences until you've done so much work to overcome these biases, right? If you actually had overcome all of this and then people were sort of without all of these impediments sort of sorting themselves, then maybe we could actually make some very, very cautious claims that they want to claim now. But we simply are nowhere near an environment enough to even sort of sketch the surface of in terms of why somebody becomes a mechanical engineer, as you said. I think the second point though is that I guess when I say certain outcomes, it's need to be ensured. The sort of very obvious example, because a lot of times, at least when people get slightly concrete about equality of opportunity, and even these guys are not as direct on this either, but they'll say basically look, every single person needs to have access to a really high quality education. Well then, okay, but if you don't equalize, as an example, the tax base, so, tax funding is dealing from property taxes, and, then that's not going to work. And then in addition to that, if, two kids are going to school and they both have a great education, but one of them doesn't have food at home or health care, or their parents don't have health care, well, that's not going to work. So I think there are certain things that we could define as outcomes, like somebody never goes without food, healthcare, housing, really basic stuff that we have to ensure before we could even properly use this equality of opportunity term to begin with, because, it just sort of, it means nothing in the absence of those, sort of basic and obvious things.
Yeah, I think it's used to fundamentally just assert without an argument that, if there isn't a jure discrimination, then you have equal opportunity. The Civil Rights Act passed, so stop complaining.
Right.
Which is, even the most, even if you wanted to extract away all social conditions, growing up in poverty, we have the science now, exposure to lead pipes, exposure to insecurity in your family, changes your cognitive ability immediately. So, and it changes your gene expression even. So, genetics cannot be separated from environment. Or even that can't be. So the most basic idea, who you are is fundamentally determined by the distribution of resources in your society to a significant degree. And this is the kind of stuff that, these very scientific-minded right-wingers will not engage with.
You're a collectivist. Okay, let's talk about Puerto Rico. There's a new Harvard study, we mentioned this the other day on the show, that suggests that Hurricane Maria has killed thousands of Puerto Ricans. And, in fact, I'll give the number specifically, 4,581. The official death toll still stands at 64. Now, I want you to explain this study in a second, and I'm asking this question not in any way, I loathe this administration. Their response to Puerto Rico is as disgusting as you would expect. And U.S. policy, frankly, far beyond the Trump administration, is obviously colonial towards Puerto Rico. But I mean, have they kept it at 64 because they're at least maybe even publicly making a claim that they're, waiting to confirm a higher number, or they don't want to sort of throw out new statistics before they know more? I mean, because that, even by their standards, that disparity is like, that's like a Gaddafi statistic.
Yeah, no, they are working with George Washington University to put together a more scientific count. The count that they currently have reflects the fact that I believe local law requires the medical examiners from the government in San Juan to examine each individual body to determine whether whether the person died as a result of the storm. And logistically, that's been very difficult to do.
Okay, so let's talk about this Harvard study. How did they go about it, and how did they sort of arrive to that number?
Right. So they just took a more macro approach and looked at. They surveyed I believe 30,000 Puerto Rican households and sort of asked whether there were deaths in the family and whatnot, and then selected them randomly, adjusted for population, and then compared the counts they arrived at to the death toll in 2016 over the same 3 months, and basically found that nearly 5,000 more people died between September and December in 2017 in Puerto Rico than did in 2016, and you wonder why that is. Well, it's almost certainly because you had a hurricane wipe out electricity and leave many hospitals without any power for long stretches of time, no cell service across large stretches of the island, and you have a population that is disproportionately elderly, and the elderly are disproportionately impoverished, and you have a recipe for mass death.
And let's just re-review. I'm just quote you briefly, and I'd like you to elaborate on the federal government had time to deploy satellite phones to the island to avoid communications blackout, which you just mentioned, that isolated remote areas from the territory's government. It could have delivered reserves of food, fuel, and water in advance of the storm. All of these failings. I mean, I would like maybe just like a kind of re-review and a reminder in the context of this administration, where it's just the sort of daily atrocities and failures and every sort of human grotesqueness, this is the type of thing that people sort of forget about. But I mean, first of all, it is actually in the United States, and it reflects this, broad colonial extractive history of Puerto Rico. So maybe just, re-review what really should be, in many respects, their Katrina.
Yeah, well, I think, as you alluded to, do I think that if Trump did everything right, that there wouldn't have been mass deaths from Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico? Probably not. I think that as you suggested, we've already, bear a great deal of responsibility for the real economic ruination of the island, and the fiscal issues that the island had resulted in having an electrical grid that was not prepared to handle a storm that was very likely going to come at some point. So, arguably, the Obama administration, all past administrations, bear some responsibility for those underlying conditions. But could Trump have done much more than he did? Obviously. They had advance notice of the storm. They did nothing to prepare for it. He went on a 4-day golf vacation after it made landfall. They did almost nothing after that. They distributed resources, emergency federal resources. They gave more to Texas, even though Texas was dealing with a less severe emergency after Harvey than they did to Puerto Rico. And, the most gratuitous things about the Trump administration is the way that the president added insult to injury, by feuding with the mayor of San Juan over Twitter, going to Puerto Rico and saying how they should be happy that this is not a real tragedy like Katrina.
Throwing paper towels at people.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
So very sort of giving in some ways maybe this is what Trump is useful for, making the way that our country fundamentally views this category of its citizens as unequal and less human, making it really sort of visible, not just in policy, but in rhetoric. But yeah, so I think that, that Trump's inadequate response killed people. I think that probably the longer history of America's extractive relationship with Puerto Rico probably killed more, or probably did more to facilitate the destruction that Maria wrought.
Absolutely. All right, let's just one more piece I want to touch on with you. You just released Purdue Pharma knew its opioids were widely abused by the late 90s. And it's just, I love, just even the historical sweep of taking us back, not that long ago, but certainly well before there was this sort of national understanding that this is a major crisis. You already had corporate malfeasance about this looming public health problem.
Yeah, there was corporate malfeasance from the very beginning. So,
right.
Obviously we've had opioids and we've had opioid addicts for a long, long time in the United States. But in the mid-1990s, Purdue Pharma, it wanted to make a lot of money off the opioids market, and it needed to solve two problems. One, most of these opioid drugs, like they've been around forever, they're available generically. And two, doctors have this belief that opioids are very addictive, and you don't want to prescribe them, too loosely, and especially not for long-term use. And so they tried to solve both these problems at once with OxyContin, which is they made a slow-release formula, and they were able to patent that, and they then subsequently argued that because this is extended release, it actually isn't appealing to drug addicts who want a big hit right away immediately, and so this is not, it can't be abused. The FDA did not actually approve that claim. What it did approve was that there is, some reason to believe that this might be slightly less addictive or less appealing to drug abusers than Vicodin. But they took that FDA claim, kneeling out that FDA claim, and advertised that this was actually safe for chronic long-term use. What was quickly apparent was that this idea made no sense, that to make an extended release opiate, you need to concentrate more drug into a smaller pill or into a smaller space. And so you can get if an opioid addict crushes the pill and snorts it, it's actually much more appealing to drug abusers than any of its competitors. And almost immediately, you had this explosion in its presence on the streets, pharmacies being robbed for it, and an immediate demand for it. And the Purdue Pharma's executives were alerted to this phenomenon, both through academic studies and anecdotal reports, almost immediately after its release. They claimed in testimony before Congress a decade later that they didn't know about their drug's potential for abuse, for widespread abuse, until the early 2000s. And the Justice Department ultimately did make a settlement with Purdue Pharma in which they got them on the misbranding charge, so on the misrepresenting the FDA's claims about what their drug could do. But the Justice Department investigators wanted to pursue felony charges against 3 Purdue Pharma executives for conspiracy to defraud the United States. And their political higher-ups appointed by George W. Bush, the George W. Bush administration's Justice Department heads, vetoed that idea and helped facilitate this fine, which was ultimately a fraction of what Purdue Pharma made off of this scheme.
As a final question, would you say that an anecdote, or an example rather, like this is illustrative of the fact that while it has been accelerated by Trump, that our whole modern political, economic, judicial experience is one of a, either a deep erosion of norms or the use of norms in the service of basically just sort of rank corporate and economic abuse, that this has a much longer history than our present moment?
Yeah, I think that there is this false dichotomy between, the idea of, is our problem rule of law or is our problem economic, is our primary problem, rule of law or primary problem economic inequality. And I think cases like Purdue Pharma's makes it fairly clear that fundamentally there's a certain level of disparity in economic power that makes it makes the rule of law into a joke, that you have a situation where our government says that, drugs are this evil, so evil that a first-time offense for dealing crack can land somebody in jail for life, but that a corporation that organizes the worst drug epidemic in American history that kills, 40,000 to 60,000 people a year, that they, get a little talking to. I think, illustrates the fact that we can't have a society that actually runs on laws and not run by men unless there is some kind of equalization in economic power.
Eric Levitz, he's a political writer from the New York Magazine Intelligencer section. Really appreciate your time as always.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. All right, folks. We're going to go to the fun half, 646-257-3920, 646-257-3920. I will open the IMs shortly. We have more sound. We have more people to make fun of. The four of us are here. Sam, I don't know. Sam, I wonder what Sam does with his 4-day work week.
He's reading Social Security reports, I imagine.
I love it. You're right. You slid right. That routine just kept carrying. He's reading Social Security reports. He's kvetching. What's on
naps in his Casper bed?
I'm taking a nap in my Casper bed. What's on Antifada this week?
Well, we're a little delayed. Unfortunately, we tried to record an episode on Fire Island over the weekend, and that didn't go very well. But we recorded something last night talking about the Jonathan Chait piece and breaking that down. And we're recording some more today. We're talking about that 30-year-old stay-at-home son as well.
That guy's awesome.
Yeah, I agree. We are in agreement on this.
Yeah.
And we're actually doing a fun thing for the first time ever. We're taking questions from our listeners. So I think it's going to be a premium thing. So if you want to ask us a question, or maybe it's more of a comment, you can join our show and email us at antifadamindset@gmail.com.
Matt, how do we pronounce her name?
Wait, whose name?
The woman, the brilliant guest we had on Tuesday, who's going to become... going to be on the show more.
Mersa Baradaran.
We talked with her about the history of intergenerational wealth collapses, then and race, but then also the history of correlations of cultural stories with economic exploitation, from divine providence to social Darwinism to market fundamentalism. Then we talked about postal banking. She's a brilliant guest. There was a segment on abolishing ICE. David Grisham has a new segment for us called the Economic Minute. We talked about this new bank run on Africa, which was fueled through quantitative easing, which is going to seriously hurt the continent, it looks like. And then Felix Biederman was in studio, and we had a lot of fun. And there's a new show, Woke Bros, that Waz and I do exclusively for TMBS and Count the Dings patrons. This Sunday, Douglas Lane and I have done a Marxist terminology primer on core concepts in Marxism. Last week, Bill Fletcher Jr., global Marxism, and next week, Mark Blythe is returning, but this time just for patrons. So check it.
Super good.
It is super good. So patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks, everybody. We appreciate all of you. And, of course, become a member of the Majority Report. And there's links to all of these things in the show notes, and as well as today's sponsor. And check out justcoffee.coop. Fair trade tea, coffee, or chocolate. We'll see you in the fun half. Welcome to the Fun Half. Michael Brooks here, along with the crew. I always want to touch on this briefly. What's happening in Brazil? I know I've talked about it a lot on both shows, but it is a coup, and it definitely has much broader regional implications and global implications than even Venezuela's example. So in Venezuela, although that's actually cooling a little bit with the release of the American prisoner that happened last week, and Bob Corker going there and helping facilitate it. But you have a government which the United States has definitely instigated and organized against and is on a coup setting against, and that's wrong, and we need to oppose in every way, shape, and form. And Venezuela, certainly under Maduro, like, this project's a failure. And Maduro is actually moving away in some respects from even a socialist label and sort of like playing a very crude direct populism and clientelism, and even moving away from some of the moves that Chavez did make towards some decentralization and actual socialist experimentation. In Brazil, there were real accomplishments. There were failures, but there were real accomplishments. You had tens of millions of people brought out of poverty by Lula, and a hard right judicial lawfare coup, which removed Dilma from office and now has imprisoned him. And they're not even letting, like, there was a joint letter from former European leaders like Francois Hollande and Massimo de Lema calling for his release and his participation in the election. The UN is demanding the right. UN officials want to be able to see him. They're not being allowed to see him. And in spite of all of this, Lula still leads in the polls. And still is ahead of his closest rival, Jair Bolsonaro, who is a congressman, a member of the Social Liberal Party, and quite literally a fascist, and not in a debated terminology, right? A guy who literally has called for a return to things like military dictatorship in Brazil. And I would just say to everybody that, Lula spent time in the 80s, I believe, or late 70s, imprisoned by the military junta, which ran Brazil until the mid-80s. Dilma was tortured when she was a guerrilla fighter. And if they could do this to even a center-left government that delivered across the board, imagine the tightening that they have around any type of even modest movement anywhere, particularly in the periphery. Add that to Lula's former defense minister saying that he doesn't think that it's incidental that Petrobras wasn't privatized, and that even Lula used Petrobras in a way that did have some real social delivery. It's something to seriously think about. So people should stay on top of that, because this is going to be the type of issue, and many Brazilians will tell you that this is like a Brazilian Mandela situation, and it's not something that I would say is sort of incidental or to the side at all. Lula libre.
What do you think that says about voting for progressive politicians as a route to social democracy?
Well, you definitely need to vote for them. I think what it says about how they chose to govern is that it's really, really hard. And that they made a play where they thought if they satisfied basically all sectors and pleased everybody, which in some ways they did. Lula left with an over 80% approval rating, that would protect them. But the commodity prices went down. Dilma's not as charismatic as he is. And there was actually in some ways, some of the backlash politics you see in Brazil was analogous. Like that started, in 2013, 2014, 2015, like before Trump, parallels it. But I think it has more to say about what somebody does when they're in power, not about negating getting them to power.
It just seems like he did everything right that he could have within the system that they had there, and he still was the target of a coup.
Well, he still brought tens of millions of people out of poverty. But I would say that when he was in power, and this is where it gets really hard, because if they went after some of the more structural problems in Brazil, which they chose not to do for very understandable reasons, they could have potentially broken up some of the sort of cartels of power they're dealing with today, which is a real question and a really big thing to deal with. But I don't think it negates getting into power. It's a question for when you're in power, what type of model do you follow? That's how I would see it. Definitely not because it's not like there was any other model available in Brazil that brought so many people out of poverty and, actually ironically ensured and expanded the post-coup Brazilian politics more than the Workers' Party. Like a lot of things that Lula is getting targeted with and the judicial system is abusing, he signed into law, like greater independence for the judiciary.
It shows how crazy the reactionary side of all this, the global reaction.
I mean, that's to me is really right. Like it just shows you what you're up against.
Like there are people that think Obama was a communist.
Exactly. Literally. And so, and the way Dilma was literally impeached on like an accounting method, right? Like she hasn't even been brought into any of this corruption stuff. And they removed her from office for like, essentially like, oh, we don't like the way you did that budget number. And now people, including like the current president who's implementing austerity, is on tape talking about bribing somebody. And he's in office. So I think it's about, looking at a certain point. And also it's a different, like that politics in Brazil is more transactional almost definitionally than, because you have so many coalition parties, you have to like appease so many interests in order to gain power. But I think like, obviously, look, if Jeremy Corbyn or Bernie Sanders acquire power, even in a place that is significantly more, advanced in some respects, you're going to need to be like, that's when the work starts. So it doesn't negate, like, of course we should vote for them and support them, and them winning is massively significant. And, opting out of electoral politics is just a fantasy. But on the other hand, I think what people are attuned to and still deluded by, and where people with like a more electoral skeptic orientation are right, is that that's like when it starts. Like Bernie wins the next day, it literally does become, what do we do to actually back this agenda? Because every single, you talk about a deep state or whatever, which is essentially some like CIA and FBI and State Department people rightly being like, hey, I don't know if I want a mental case to be president. Okay. Every single incumbent power of the United States is going to try to destroy that person and agenda.
That's what I'm worried about.
That does so, but we still got to do it.
Yeah, certainly.
Right?
It doesn't mean don't do it.
Yeah.
But in terms of its chances of long-term success in bringing about some sort of equal society, like the jury's still out for me. Even in first world countries, you see, I don't know if you believe in the Harold Wilson conspiracy theories, but this stuff does happen.
I believe the JFK ones.
I totally believe in the Harold Wilson ones, but I don't know, that still doesn't like.
I think you still have to keep throwing stuff at the wall.
Yeah, you have to do it, and also you have to do something somewhat within the playing field of the reality we have. Like there is a small chance that there could be a real social democratic move forward, which if it actually succeeded would open up way more playing field, which is why these people don't want it so much. There's no chance right now if we're just being like grounded, and maybe there'll be some magical consciousness shift and 2012 is actually in 2020 and the Mayan calendar will open up and there'll be some type of like, vegan revolution. But that's not happening now. What?
That'd be nice.
Well, except for the vegan part.
Sounds good.
But
to me.
yeah, but so that electoral process is essential. But yes, even like in Brazil, there's no doubt. Like when they were protesting him going to prison, they brought back all of the unions and the cadres, and they were literally protecting him in a union building. And that same activation definitely should have been enhanced while they were in power. And that's the type of concrete, operational, and actual lesson that any social democratic candidacy is going to need to take into account in power.
Even Bill Clinton, right? This is the same playbook as Whitewater and Monica.
Yeah, definitely.
And then didn't Lula turn himself in and say he has faith in the criminal justice system?
Yeah,
that was a terrible thing to do.
It was literally the only thing that could be done, because they actually ran an experiment, to be real. They did the play. Will enough people come out on the streets to stop this? And they didn't, because he did hang out there for a while. And then look, and this is another paradox of the age we're in. Lula and the Workers' Party are the party of modern, and this is like in a positive sense, modern bourgeois democracy, which is preferable to fascism.
Yeah, well,
so he
sure.
wasn't completely bullshitting. He was like, look, I did sign this legislation. I oppose corruption, and okay. But at the same time, no. Like, they did basically, some people did light some tires on fire. Lula did give a speech basically being like, fuck that. And not enough people were out to actually do it. And there's also the violence question. You know, Marielle Franco was assassinated. Lula's bus was shot at. Like, there's a lot of other things going on there in terms of what it could have been a much more significant bloodbath. In the helicopter that he was on getting flown to prison, the pilots were on a public channel. They didn't know about it. And the guards were joking. They said, maybe we should just throw him off the plane with the rest of the trash.
Well,
so that's what it is.
The right's violent. The status quo is violent.
Definitely.
I don't fetishize violence, but sometimes, I don't know. In the long term, not talking in the short term, but like, God, we got to defend ourselves.
The maintenance of these things has required violence.
There's no doubt.
Yeah.
There's no doubt. And I think that,
or constantly requires it, I guess. And they
constantly
they
requires
try to keep it off the page.
And what is violence? It's violence to, even the healthcare bills that didn't pass were a form of massive violence on people. Keeping people up at night, not knowing whether or not they'll be able to survive or live is violence. It's terrorism. It's psychic terrorism.
Yep.
It's all violence. There's no doubt about it.
The whole thing makes me wonder. I mean, obviously my position on this has been pretty clear over time, but it makes me wonder if the kind of social democracy that Lula was trying to create is ever going to be enough, because these forces are going to come back on you as soon as they possibly can, and that's what happened.
Well, I don't think they're going to be enough. But I also know that getting to even the possibility of opening that armor is going to need to involve those types of wins. I also don't know, for what it's worth, Lula got elected at a different historical moment. He got elected in 2002, George Bush as president, Tony Blair as prime minister, and he actually came in and pretty much figured out a way where he was friendly with everybody from like Bush to the leaders of Iran. Like, he was a true synthesizing leader. Somebody like Lula comes along with his background in his politics, and Bernie's president and Corbyn's prime minister, he would have pursued a different path. So, there's also just like the historical moments that people occur in. And even what he was talking about doing and is talking about doing this time, if he's elected again and gets out of prison, is going to be a very different ballgame. So, that's the other aspect of it too.
We'll see. I want to be optimistic.
Well, I think we don't have the luxury of cynicism. You're calling from an 818 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, what's up, guys?
What's up?
This is Barry out in L.A.
Hey, what's going on, Barry? What's good?
Not much, man. How are you?
Good.
Yeah, I just wanted to call a little bit and talk about these. Obviously, you're talking about violence, and you're talking about it in the Brazilian sense, or in the Brazilian model. But I don't know if you saw that there was another sort of one of these body camera things in, I guess it was Jersey, where cops beat up a 20-year-old woman.
Yeah, I think I thought we were going to play that yesterday, but I guess we didn't get to that. But yes, I did see. I'm familiar with that. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it just sort of I'm a PhD student. A lot of what I do is concentrating on like operant conditioning, stuff like that, and like psychology. But and so this is all that this really is, right? It's like normalization of this state-sponsored violence. And then you see it manifested with these guys who go out and just think that they have the right to just pummel somebody for not following their orders. And a lot of the things that I saw in my dissertation was that when you watch all this prison and police porn that they have on cable TV, I mean that stuff goes a long way to just condition people to accept that this isn't this isn't this, that the state's going to kick your ass. And that,
one of the most disturbing things about that video, I mean, obviously the most disturbing thing is watching them, pummel on this like little woman. And it would be, obviously it's just as disturbing when they do it to a large dude, but there is something kind of, she's just like this petite whatever, and they're just pounding on her. But what's so disturbing in its own way is there's somebody off camera who's not a cop yelling, "Stop resisting." Now, I'm not a person who demands like let's be the opposite of Trump. Like, I don't know, we would all like to think that if we were there and we were seeing something like this take place, we would, try to intervene some way to stop this act of abuse. But short of that, right, like putting the expectations of somebody to be heroic, to actually be standing there and being like encouraging the beating, the psychosis, the sickness, the disgustingness, the lack of just basic human mechanisms of that is horrifying. And I think it reflects what you're saying. Look, why don't you wait a second? We'll play this clip. We got it up.
Oh, stop resisting! 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 Back up! Stop resisting! Stop resisting! They got me! It doesn't matter! You're not allowed to hit me like that! Back up!
Yeah, so there it is.
No, it's disgusting, and I think that I don't. Obviously, you're not going to take up arms against the state or anything like that. But I think what Jamie was saying right now is like there's a fair point. There is a point where people need to. I don't know if obviously not fight back isn't the right word, but just defend themselves, right? And it's like,
yeah, but I don't know what that means,
level?
Right? Like I'm not somebody right. Like politically, temperamentally, and philosophically, I'm not like like I shouldn't make this joke, but like I'm the type of person when I do an illicit history on Jamaica and what happened in the 70s, my reaction is not like, oh, I can't believe that Michael Manley was complicit in some like garrison activity. I'm like, oh, I wonder how he could have been more effective so he won. So like I get that perspective, but I also don't, like we throw these things out there and it's like in terms of reality, like that, there isn't going to be like, even just like the historical material conditions of like, guerrilla uprisings, right? Like that isn't what is happening here. That isn't like
right.
the power dynamic or the reality. So what that actually means, I don't know. I guess it would, to me, I don't know how you start with even getting people to not be co-participants in that abuse in that video. I mean, that's pretty fucking disheartening. Like, that shouldn't get any easier for even like fucking beachgoers in New Jersey. Like, stop punching this drunk chick in the head. Like, you're right. Okay. She's not going to harm you guys. You can calm the fuck down. It's insanity. I don't know.
Yeah, no. Well, thanks for the time, man. I'll let you go here, but take care.
Appreciate the call.
For the call.
Can we say, has anybody else, like I've drank on New York beaches like a half dozen times or so and never had any incident. That's
never.
Just fucking insane.
Never.
I've spent weekends in Wildwood for like, I'm not going to dox myself like this, but I've been there in a organized way that has a ton of people on it drinking and no problems. Like, I mean, why?
But I think that partially reveal, right? But that's part of the problem with how this job is being done, because it's like, it's literally just like personal discretion, like of the cops.
Yeah. Yes.
Like, I mean, that they could have just as easily, like, maybe if that guy's like, I don't know, but like the cheap, but not totally cheap part of me is like, I don't know, maybe that guy's girlfriend gave him some in the morning. He's in a decent mood. He doesn't have something to prove. He's like, oh, drink some water, sweetheart. Okay.
Which is like that.
Then I don't know. Somebody said he was short at the Home Depot, and he was what the fuck.
That
Now he's
factor is
beating-
like classic totalitarian system too, right? Like it's.
I
all,
think that's
always on
exactly
that.
right.
This is what the police do. And there's, a larger systemic critique that goes back to their original purpose, which was protecting private property, some of which was human beings at the time that our nation was founded. And it's not a bad apple when you see a cop terrorizing somebody. Like, this is what the cops are supposed to do. They defend private property. They terrorize surplus populations that aren't currently involved in labor, right? They
like drunk girls in New Jersey.
Yeah, I don't know.
That was what Marx talked about with the
Yeah.
surplus class. He was talking about drunk chicks.
Well,
in
and imagine
New Jersey.
thinking like that's protecting like your freedom, right? Like,
like
open
freaking out some
container.
baby because you're like literally punching some girl in the head for drinking a beer. Yeah, that's really
It's
soothing
absurd.
a situation, guys.
But
Thank
like
you.
that's what they are there to do.
I mean,
they're not there to serve and protect.
They're not necessarily there to do that in reality. Like I hear what you're saying. That type of thing, they're not necessarily there to like. The fact, frankly, if we're being blunt about it, that it happened on that beach to a white girl is not in any way like. It's like that is the part that shows like, okay, when they're terrorizing and over policing certain neighborhoods in a political and structural sense, that's absolutely what they're supposed to do, and that's absolutely why it's a systemic problem. When they're
Sometimes it
doing
spills
that,
over,
when they're
to
doing,
some
oh
white
yeah,
people.
that's a spillover. That's
Yeah.
a spillover. That is definitely a spillover.
But that's where it comes from.
I think it also comes from like being called short at Home Depot.
Perhaps.
But speaking of which, okay, we'll get to Alex Jones later because I want to get to the cool stuff later. So let's start with, we'll go on okay. Jim Acosta was at a Trump event in where was this? In Nashville,
where he was accosted,
and Costa was accosted.
Matt gives you 15 seconds on those, and if not, he's taking it.
This is something else, though. I mean, this is like, from our perspective. I mean, CNN, whatever. I mean, it's this is the Trump network. This is the waters they swim in. But like, this is a mainstream reporter who's just doing like very, basic, solid monitoring this insane president stuff, this corrupt administration stuff.
He works his beat.
He works his beat, and this is the totalitarian mindset.
Later tweeted out this photo, and he said there were plenty of people who came up to him with nice things to say. But CNN political analyst and New York Times White House reporter Julie Davis tweeted this. Depressing sight at Trump rally in Nashville. Adorable young boy, probably about my son's age, pointing iPhone at me and other reporters and snapping pics while screaming fake news. A child
Pause
who
it.
will grow up
That part's funny.
believing
Keep
a
going.
free and fair press is the enemy, a bad thing to be mocked and hated. And Jim Acosta is with me now. Wow. I mean, that's strong from Julie.
Wow.
But
Yeah.
tell me about your experience and how bad the heckling got.
Well, it got bad at one point towards the end of the rally. There was one man who was standing right in front of what we affectionately call the press cage, the press area inside these Trump rallies, and he was yelling scumbag and that sort of thing at us for a good 20 minutes or so. There is some audio of that. We can play that for you and then paint the picture a little bit more for you, Brooke.
20 minutes.
Okay.
Pause it. Wait. No, wait. Wait, does he look like the lawyer a little bit? He does. Oh my God. All right, go ahead. Sorry.
Now, Brooke, it is a little surreal to hear that sort of stuff thrown at you while Tiny Dancer by Elton John is playing in the
Okay, it's good call. That was what I was noticing.
Yes, the song
sound
in the background
drop.
really makes it.
Yeah. But, there's a problem that, so, okay, whatever. I'm laughing at it, and I guess we're really playing the Jonathan Chait role here. We're like, you see, the left thinks it's funny that the CNN reporter would be terrorized at a Trump rally.
We do.
Okay, yeah. First of all, yes, we do. But secondly, look, I have no problem. That is a totalitarian thug mindset, and it's disturbing. But the problem, especially with that first melodramatic tweet, is like, it's such a lack of recognition of where most people hold you in reality in the society. Like, people don't look at most media networks and think that they're guardians of like an exalted democratic order. They think you're self-involved narcissists who spin news and cover trivia, which is often true.
And you're proving their point with videos and segments like this during your news hour,
where you're basically just turning it into self-victimization. I mean, you're not even like, the first thing is a sort of profoundly pretentious tweet about, oh, this child and democracy. Shut up. And now it's like, oh, well, it felt really weird to be called a scumbag. Well, like, then don't do it. Like, do something else to not play this role. And that is the problem, is that the fascists diagnose the technocracy and they do it. They always are doing it.
It reminds me of what you just said, reminds me of a scene in Handmaid's Tale, which I, as you know, I'm building my
Where's my
critique
board,
of,
Matt?
where, I mean, spoiler alert, but this episode was a while ago, so whatever. She's like in the
oh God,
building.
Please don't give it to this audience.
No, spoilers are fine. Go ahead, Jamie.
She's like in the building where the Boston Globe used to be before they all got shot by the fascists, and the whole episode is like, not the media. Oh no, the poor media. And that's, I think, one thing that people who like this show really care about.
I just think that you need to be that. You can't just state that.
I don't think it's ever been the case that TV is a good medium for getting informed on this type of shit anyway. So like, and especially not particularly like the last 20 years of cable news. So like that alienation, the reason that they can't speak to that guy is because they aren't made to do that.
Because they're alienated.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean that is actually the modern predicament in a nutshell. That guy is a proto-fascist thug who would be dangerous if he actually grew up in a society that demanded something of him physically or intellectually. And so he's just sort of like a horrible suburban mediocrity who like has, the pretensions of being a proper brown shirt. And then they're all like blow dried like narcissists who are like, no, like we're gonna do like another segment about how like Don Jr. said something dumb on Twitter, and that's like being like Moreau.
There's two steps. You can sort of have the realization that you're not getting good into like informational nourishment from this channel, which I would bet is the experience most people have, regardless of intelligence, watching CNN.
Right.
And then what they do after that is out of your hands.
Yeah, what's in your hands is what you do.
They're both bad.
You're calling from
both sides.
Both sides.
Both sides.
There are
Both
bad
sides,
people
both
on
sides.
both sides of that.
The bad. That's Jamie when she's. There were people. There were many people. There was the guy calling Jim Acosta a scumbag, which was tough, but then there was also Jim Acosta.
Pretty much.
Jim Acosta's really like far from the worst, but it's just like funny the way that like whole segment. It's just like
Jim Acosta could be on the newsroom with that Aaron Sorkin show, and he would not be out of place.
Oh, did you?
You could just slide him in, like deleted scenes.
In the post game, Felix Biederman and I did a spec script for Newsroom Infowars, which is Eric Sorkin's newsroom, except inside Infowars. So a bunch of like pretentious tracking shots and dialogue where people are like, just because you broke Pizzagate doesn't mean that Estrogen and Capri Sun is the same story.
I think David Mamet could really write the shit out of that.
David Mamet can be the shit out of that.
I'd watch the shit out of that.
You're calling from a 214 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, William calling from LA. How are you guys?
Hey, what's going on, William? Good.
Hey, so kind of related both to what you guys were just talking about, and then also in reference to some of the things that your guest was talking about yesterday. You know, I think a lot of people on the left are still kind of disturbed by some of what we're seeing from the average Trump voter. Just, I mean, in terms of the authoritarian tendencies of some of the things that we're seeing on the news. And I think we typically fall into two interrelated camps of how we critique that behavior. One being sort of an identitarian critique, another being a materialist. And the identitarian critique is like the cis white heteropatriarchy is out of control. And then the materialist being, we're sort of living through sort of a post-capitalist or late capitalist sort of nausea, and we're acting out in ways that don't necessarily make sense.
Right.
Did your guest have a chance to talk about Bacon's Rebellion by chance when he was talking about British colonialism and its impact on race relations in the colonies?
I don't think so. I don't think Horn mentioned that yesterday.
Do tell.
No.
Because this is a historical event that's just kind of captured my imagination for a long time and kind of weighed the balance a little bit between those two critiques for me. And just to give you a brief overview, and hang with me here because it's a little bit, it seems contradictory. A guy named Nathaniel Bacon teamed up with a bunch of white indentured servants and black freedmen in the 1670s. Okay. And so basically right after the acquisition of Jamaica, to try to take over some Native American lands in what I think was Virginia, in opposition to the colonial charter, who had basically a treaty with the Native Americans not to, to stay within a certain border, just to kind of keep the peace. And basically, it's an early example of just the lower class together, regardless of race, coming together to fight some oppression. And unfortunately, the brunt of the violence was the Native Americans, which is unfortunate. But basically, as a result of this conflict, in which the rebellion also had a conflict with the colonial rulers themselves, the colonial rulers instituted anti-miscegenation laws, and basically, in policy, started to divide the lower classes along racial lines as a form of dividing and control. And it's fascinating to look back at some primary sources that you can find in a book called American Slavery, American Freedom by Edmund Morgan.
Okay.
Where you get a lot of primary sources from 1600s British noblemen and intellectuals, basically using the exact same language that would be used to describe explicitly black people in the 1700s to describe all people in the lower classes, including the Irish, the poor in Britain, and to a certain extent, there's a little bit almost more salutary language about Native Americans and people from Africa at the time, but that, because of just the circumstances.
What's the book again?
It's called American Slavery, American Freedom by Edmund Morgan.
There's another thing moving forward. There's a book, I think it's called something like The War Inside the South, which gets into some of the complexities that come out. I mean, it was actually it was a good movie with Matthew McConaughey called The Free State of Jones. And that moves forward on some, basically lives like a rebel group of Southerners. He actually ditched the Confederate Army, and he essentially had the insight that I, as a sort of poor kind of farmer, essentially, I don't own any property, I don't own any people, and I'm fighting a losing battle for basically Southern landowners. And he ended up linking up with escaped slaves and having their own sort of guerrilla army, and literally they tried to have an independent sovereign state called the Free State of Jones. So there is a rich history to this stuff, and I agree with you. You can read examples did an illicit history on what was it? It was Wilmington, North Carolina, which was had a multiracial group in the post-Reconstruction South that took over this city, and under the protection briefly of like Northern troops, there was actually like a progressive multiracial coalition governing the city, and then there was literally an oligarch property owning backed coup, of which the lower end, like the foot soldier part of it, was instigated by white supremacist and racist propaganda, and the economic interests that fueled it were traditional Southern aristocracy. So it's funny, you can find examples and actually go like, no, there are times in American history absolutely where this type of cross-racial class coalition was achieved, and we should learn from it and emulate it, and that's it. That's the future of politics. And there's tons of examples of and what blew that apart? Well, white supremacy. And that was always the greatest fuel of the fire for that coalition to be broke apart by, capital interests. So
that's all super interesting.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, people look at me like I'm a conspiracy theorist.
Yeah, I think you just hit the nail on the head. That basically, there's sort of a chicken and the egg argument about.
Hold on, I'm sorry. Hold on, just 1 second. Side. Jamie just wanted to add something, and then
Can you hear
go
me?
ahead. Can you hear her now?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, people look at me like I'm a conspiracy theorist when I talk about how stuff like racism and sexism is used to divide the working class by the ruling class because it benefits the ruling class, obviously, to have people divided. But there are so many examples in history where we can see this actually happening. So I'm really glad you brought that up.
Yeah, that's the violence, how that maintains it.
That's exactly. And I mean, I think the only, it's just when people on both sides of it get dumbed down, where when one side's like the be all end all of politics is identity expression is both wrong and also has incredibly dangerous implications for how we actually do politics. And then on the other hand, if we were to just reduce it, all this stuff is just a side consequence of economics. I think that might be true in a grand historical sense. But it has its own cultural life and its own energy and its own motivation. So we can't reduce it to it. It's a dynamic interplay. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. And definitely for you and your listeners, check out the history of the English Civil War as well, and just kind of what happened there in terms of why a lot of people in England around the 16 and 1700s were so afraid of the lower classes. And how it was sort of a prefigurement of the French Revolution, and just had a lot of impact on the way that both upper classes in America, the colonies, as well as the British government were making policy. But yeah, thanks for your time. And I'll
appreciate it. No, that was great. I'm going to read up more on that. That's fascinating. Thank you. Okay. This is a perfect Majority Report transition. Erudite caller leading to a fascinating conversation on race, American history, racism, cultural determinism versus economic determinism, the fusion we need to actually achieve change. And now Tucker motherfucking Carlson, who literally actually is a perfect synthesis of oligarchic interests using racism and
when
other ism. Yeah.
When TV dinners strike back.
Right. Precisely. Exactly. Roseanne was fired. You can't even see what people think anymore. You can't make jokes anymore. This is obviously the time when someone like Roseanne tweets a racist joke. And I just have to say really quickly, I don't really care about stuff like this. I don't. Fuck her. I'm glad she's fired. Frankly, you know what? There's a neo-Confederate attorney general. There's enough for black people to deal with. So fire her. Fuck her. Whatever. I loved watching conservatives freak out about this, but this is this is not the stuff we need to deal with. But whatever. Screw her. But always the most important parts of this stuff, I feel like, are the after effects of it and the spillover and how the right spins it. And we saw Rush Limbaugh yesterday, and basically he did, it's all about Colin Kaepernick. Of course, Colin Kaepernick, let me just say here, The difference is I'm not interested in a logical difference between Roseanne and Colin Kaepernick. There are similar themes there, but I support Colin Kaepernick because he's right. Yeah. Not because, like, by your logic. I support him because I'm on his side and not her side, because I oppose racism and police killings and also jokes that aren't funny on Twitter.
We've come to conclusions on some of those topics.
Right. We've actually established some conclusions here. So it's not like, what's the principle at play? The principle at play is if a private company wants to fire somebody for making a racist comment on Twitter, I don't care. / I'm relatively happy. If an NFL league or any sports league, a monopoly wants to destroy somebody's career, exclude them from playing even though they're a decent player because they've exercised an enormous personal risk, a vital statement on behalf of one of the most important issues that we face as a society, I support them. And it's not because of some abstract principle about whatever. And I do support free speech. And by the way, both of them are able to some extent exercise their free speech. It's just that they've had it jeopardized by private corporations they work for, which is legal. It's just that I don't care / I'm happy about what IBC did. And in the NFL, I'm with Colin Kaepernick. So let me just make that clear before you even come to me about double standards. I have a double standard. Colin Kaepernick is right. Roseanne is wrong.
Yeah, Kaepernick meets one and Roseanne doesn't.
Precisely. And so now Tucker Carlson is going to go and do the classic conservative move to any revelation of actual racism, Roseanne, with the age-old conservative question, which I feel like at this point I'm almost like wondering if we could do a genealogy of this question going back to like the original slave traders, which is, who are the real racists?
People were murdered. Also on stage last night was a guy called Tim Wise. Wise describes himself as a professional anti-racism activist, which ought to be a tip-off that he himself is a racist, which obviously he is. Here's Wise using MSNBC's platform to make ugly generalizations based on skin color. Watch this.
White America has been raised to believe, A, the police are always the good guys, and frankly, that black lives matter less than white comfort. What you are saying is my discomfort with you right now is worth more than the potential that your life could be snuffed in 10 minutes.
Wait, isn't that slander against an entire racial category?
Pause it.
Oh, yes, it is.
Oh, I was going to say, no, it is not. But I guess Tucker's ahead of me. Go ahead.
But let's say you want an even more nasty racial stereotyping. MSNBC is the channel for you. They've got it.
Yeah,
Here's Tim Wise again.
Really like to hear
Keep in mind, this is what liberals are now claiming is the opposite of racism.
The gentrifiers of today, their parents or their grandparents ran away from the city to get away from black and brown folk. And now their children and their grandchildren are saying, oh, the suburbs, there's only so many Olive Gardens I can go to, so I need to go back to the city and get my life in the city. But when I do that, I need to have my hot yoga studio and my pottery studio and my stuff represented. And if you intrude on that, I will then call the police.
Are you taking notes on this? Are you getting this?
Sure.
They're telling you on MSNBC that because certain people have the same skin color, they all have the same dumb attitudes. They like the same crappy restaurants. They spend their free time pursuing the same frivolous hobbies. And by the way, they are all, every one of them, immoral. You can tell by the way they look. That's the official position of the American left, the same people currently accusing you of racism.
Now, there's a couple of things to break down here. I'll start with by your logic. If Tucker is so concerned about any type of broad category statements about groups, then I look forward to his relentless debunking of Islamophobia, his careful and nuanced attention to the distinction within immigrant communities from Latin America. Oh, wait, no, I'm just kidding. Of course not. Look, there's some holes in what Tim Wise was saying. There's no economics in that. There's no class analysis. Gentrification is obviously because of the massive overlap between economic inequalities and policing and race. Of course, there's a massive racial component to it, but it's a class and capital process. And he's just talking about it purely as one of sort of like social manners and conditioning, which is not remotely the whole story. And that's where I think, a guy like Tim Wise will fall very significantly short and be, sort of decent college lecturer, but not, not really do serious analysis. But that being said, there's nothing he said there that is, first of all, remotely racist. He's talking about social conditioning. And if you're that touchy and that sensitive by any macro comment about that, once again, I'll do it by your logic. I don't ever want to hear a single comment about the fill in the blank family or the beliefs of fill in the blank. And also, dude, hang out on the ropes a little bit and enjoy the fact that when somebody says something like that about you as a white person, it doesn't mean anything. Yeah. What is this incredible insecurity that these people have?
I will never get mad at someone for making fun of me for being white. Just throwing that out there.
It's just ridiculous. There's zero stakes to it. There's no stakes, dude.
It's just acknowledging reality.
It's acknowledging precisely.
I can trace my lineage, right? My parents farmsteaded in North Dakota, right? That's a land giveaway to people. They wanted it because they wanted white people in North Dakota.
Oh my
right?
God, you hate yourself.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
much.
This is just and the problem, he's now we're doing identity politics. This country was in large part shaped by identity politics.
It was by white identity politics.
Pick a century or a decade. There was a major thing, whether it was the Trail of Tears, whether it was not King James saying don't sell guns to Native Americans, right? This is all identity politics shit. That's why North Dakota is 95% white. That's not where we're from. It happened that way because of specific policies.
Maybe he just really hates yoga. He's like, how dare you imply
I don't do yoga.
That everyone
I don't do anything for my body.
That white people
Look at
all
my face. It's all puffy. That's really unfair. I mean, I also have to say, if you have a whole team and you work at Fox, and the greatest clips that you can pull out from an MSNBC forum to prove that they hate white people, I was waiting for, because Tim, I was waiting for some Yakub shit. I was waiting for Tim Wise to be like, yeah, I'm a Yakubian. I was created in a cave. I can admit that as a whitey. I thought we were going to get something exciting here, not basic truisms about the reality of growing up in this country and how you relate to police. Stuff that this is Chris Rock level, comedy record from the 90s obviousness. In fact, I've heard in racist diatribes from asshole conservatives the point that white people and black people are trained to think differently about the police. Just their point is that you should sit back and take it. Which sounds like identity politics to me. Dude, very sad. I have some respect for Tucker Carlson's evil skills as a broadcaster, but in these clips, you've been really falling off. And if that's your whole team and the best you could come up with was a hot yoga crack and a truism about policing, you need to fucking reinvent the wheel, or at least doctor some quotes or something.
Yeah,
that's just pathetic.
If any Tucker producers listen to this show, come on.
Yeah, we're up your fucking game. And if not, wait for the next welcome back. I'm Chris Hayes. I hate my white blood and everything it represents. Hi, I'm Rachel Maddow.
Europeans are a cancer.
Europeans are a cancer. I apologize for being white. Actually, if this happened, I would be a regular. I never watch NBC. Imagine Chris Matthews. He's just by the way, I hate myself for being white.
Huh,
I'm a devil. It's the official MSNBC policy.
Pass the message along through Sam one of these days. Maybe you'll be the staff white guilt correspondent.
I would know. I'm not white. I have no guilt, but I would be staff white devil correspondent. I would love to be. I'd be like, I think Tim isn't getting to half of it. I think we're fundamentally corrupted as a species.
Michael's the Candace Owens of white people.
Yeah, I'm like, nobody cares what you think. Hey, white people, nobody cares what you think.
Wake up.
Wake up.
It's time for an awakening.
It's time to get that what Louis Farrakhan is saying is true. You're calling from a 234 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hi.
Hello.
Hello. Yeah. My name is Sigil, and I'm calling from Nigeria.
Hey, what's going on, Sigil?
Yeah. Sorry, this is just really exciting. I've been like calling for like the past hour. Anyway.
Oh, no worries. What's on your mind?
Well, I just wanted to talk about something that I don't think gets enough media coverage from any media, not media in Nigeria or abroad. It's basically about the rights of queer people, LGBT people in Africa, specifically Nigeria, which is not in a great state, as you can imagine. There's been like a crazy increase in hate crimes and just terrible treatment of people in this country. Like, what will often happen is that the community that these people are in will find them at the most vulnerable moment, i.e. in the middle of committing quote-unquote sodomy, and then they'll humiliate them and like publicly just ruin their lives, basically. And it gets no coverage from our media, and I don't think it gets enough coverage from Western media either. So.
Do you can I ask, do you live in Nigeria, or are you studying abroad there, or
Yeah, I'm in Lagos, Nigeria right now.
You're in Lagos.
Yeah, I'm from Lagos, Nigeria.
Okay. And what's the legal status? Like, what are the laws?
Oh,
on the books
well,
in Nigeria?
in 2014, Goodluck Jonathan basically passed a law that was called the Same-Sex Prohibition Act.
Yep.
But it wasn't for same-sex marriages. It was for basically just banning gayness further.
Right.
Well, we had like anti-sodomy laws from colonialism, but this law was passed as a trick, basically, because he was like dwindling in popularity at the time.
Right.
And he needed something to like get people on his side, and he still lost the fucking election too.
Yeah. So
Who we
in
have
South Africa, there is marriage equality because that was part of the constitution.
Yeah, the only
right.
country in Africa.
The only
basically.
country, and they had it before most of the Western countries because that was, I think that was written into the Liberation Constitution. I remember this issue actually got a lot of attention when Obama was president. And he actually had, I forget who he was talking to, but he had there was an exchange with an African head of state where basically Obama brought it up, and the African head of state was like, well, we banned the death penalty. You still have the death penalty. Don't lecture us on human rights, blah, blah. And it's one of those issues that is tough, I think, to talk about from a certain kind of left perspective, because there was a lot of, and this was, particularly during a administration, more democratic, like humanitarian intervention ones. Not that was on the table, obviously, but there is a lot of like double standard discourse on human rights, which usually always have sort of like a political kind of agenda from them. But then at the same time, like I think, of course, and then at the same time, like obviously we need to have, to the extent it's possible, global solidarity, and be aligned with people who are oppressed wherever they are. I mean, I've noticed as an example more recently, though, like I've personally, like I have felt a little bit more skepticism about like when there's like an uprising, like in Iran, like there was several months ago, the labor uprising, like I talk about it and I support it. But I also don't I think, frankly, Western politicians saying something in favor of it would hurt it, to be honest. I know it's a very different issue that you're talking about, but I don't know what the right approach is. What do you think the right approach is to dealing with it from, like an outsider perspective?
I think politicians can actually only hurt the cause. As you can imagine, like Western politicians, not increasingly popular in the non-Western world, but like I think because Theresa May actually did talk about LGBT rights recently, and that got a massive backlash from our politicians and from our media, saying like "fuck off," basically, like you left us. Like we decolonized from you years ago. Stop talking to us. Was basically the response. But I think the politicians can only are what's gonna hurt it. But what I think will help is a media uproar, because our culture is basically saturated with Western culture. Like the foreign box office, like is basically tailored to places like Nigeria and China to like market to them. They're basically the entire American box office.
So like the next like Avenger villain needs to be like a homophobe or something.
Honestly,
Not even
I'm
joking.
for,
Like
the-
seriously.
like
yeah.
that's what I'm seriously waiting for. I'm waiting for like the next Black Panther movie to be about like how mutants are treated in Wakanda and make it like the most obvious allegory so everyone gets it.
Like it.
That's really funny. It's like we realized that the mutants were important for our creative economy. Very early on.
Western
It's Wakanda,
politicians-
so
I
it's
had
got to
no
be a
idea
little
he
neoliberal.
was
It's
swung
gotta-
that way from me.
He was born that way.
Oh man.
So if we talked about it on
We
a
live
show
in
like
hope.
this, you think it might make some small bit of difference?
Yeah, I really do think it will, because another thing is that people are very like there's not a lot of exposure. Everyone's terrified to come out, so no one thinks they actually know a queer or gay person. But if there was more like voices of Nigerian queer people, like a lot of people think colonizers brought gayness here, it's a new invention brought on by the Industrial Revolution by like white people who came to colonize us.
Well,
And
no,
it's
I
like,
mean,
no,
yeah, I
we've
mean,
been gay for
Mugabe
literally
said that
forever.
specifically, right? I mean,
It's so shitty. Like,
yeah.
So, This is part of what's so harmful about this, like, cynical identity politics being paired with the left wing of neoliberalism. Like, bourgeois politicians in the U.S. use stuff like gay rights and women's rights to justify imperialism and violence. And they posit themselves as this like woke, or like Israel is like a woke society because gay people have rights, and it's disgusting.
we did just kill that baby, but let me ask you this. Would that baby go to a pride parade? No.
And it's even more ridiculous because the roots of LGBT struggle are largely working class and people of color.
I also think the other theme that this brings
And can I
up-
just say
Yeah,
another
please,
thing
go ahead.
about like how your media
Yes.
takes advantage of this kind of like actual thing? Like the quote unquote intellectual dark web likes to talk about free speech and shit, but like obviously they don't care about that. Sean Spice, whoever his name, what's his face, basically admitted he didn't care about that. But like free
Who's
speech
it?
in this country is actually
Richard
limited.
Spencer,
Like
right.
in the law, it says that gay people they do not have the right to assemble. They do not have the right to defend themselves. And when the bill was passed, there was people that were trying to filibuster it, basically like stop it from being passed, argue a case against it, and they were booed out of like the National Assembly. They weren't allowed to speak. So that's like an actual suppression of free speech. And when I hear like these intellectual dark web people talking about it, it's like
It also, it's funny too, because it also like, I just did a segment from my show at Bill Fletcher Jr. on global Marxism, and specifically focused a lot on Africa. And one of the things that I really liked that he pointed out that was so smart and so missing from so many of these arguments was he was saying like, look, on one hand, obviously like colonized, oppressed people, they need to have a sense and a proper understanding of their own history and realize like all of their civilizational contributions and sophistication. That's vital. But then conversely, politics, anti-colonial politics, he's like, there's a socialist anti-colonialism of like Cabral and this idea,
Honestly,
right?
yeah.
But then there's a reactionary one that just simply like, which along like every other reactionary politics makes up and romanticizes a past. So even that rhetoric of, well, it's like, well, of course we oppose the colonizers, but then everything gets swept like, well, being gay, that's colonial. It's like, no, it's
but
not. That's
then
human.
all your
That's
ideologies
human.
come from the book the colonizers left us. Honestly, it's
Right.
a joke.
And what you've, yeah, absolutely. And what you've sort of like the imagined past, which is always right wing politics wherever it manifests.
Yeah,
And always
that kind
that's
of like
used to oppress people.
master fascist shit.
Exactly.
It's like idealizing the past, no matter what the cost. Even though you don't like read about the past, you just make up what you want the past to be. Anyway.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, let me just say, I mean, we will, and I will on my show. That's really the type of thing I want guidance from people, you know, who live in Nigeria is an obvious example of this conversation, because I just don't know the best way to play those things sometimes, because I'm not like trying to be a relativist about it.
Well, I'd
but
be
I
like
also,
happy to call into your show or like talk about it anytime. Honestly.
Definitely. That would be great. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Also, if you want more news on queer rights in Nigeria, go to you can Google Tears Nigeria or No Strings NG. Those are two great websites for finding out news about what's going on with queer people in the country.
What was the first one again?
Tears, TIERS, Nigeria.
Tears Nigeria, and the other one is No Strings NG.
Yeah.
Got it. All right. Thank you so much. Talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, Michael. This is great.
Appreciate it.
I love when we have international calls.
Dude, we have a mind blowing. we got some really incredible callers on this show. Like much appreciation.
Quality callers today, especially.
Amazing. Yeah. Let's keep with quality and get to the greatest broadcaster of our generation. You know how like Tucker, that's like the old method. Like, it was really racist. Tim Wise, because he said that white people are not taught to be afraid of cops. That was really racist. You might as well just kill. Why don't you just kill all the white people? Alex Jones, being a genius and being a boss and being the best broadcaster of his generation, he knows how to deal from a right wing, and not just right wing, just an obscurist. Just beautiful obscurist. This is how you deal with the Roseanne situation and how you totally miss the point and totally divert attention, but in a way that's just actually really funny.
And self-promoting.
And brilliantly self-promoting.
Chimpanzees, apes, orangutans. And you can see the comparisons. They teach that in sociology, psychology, anthropology. It's well known. So if you compare some black lady to looking simian, well, there's a reason.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Because we are.
I just need to say, I guess, for people listening, the first image is a comparison shot of Trump split with an ape. Is that an ape?
I think that would be a chimpanzee.
A chimpanzee. So chimp and a chimp. So he's doing a bunch of photos of white people that look chimp and ape-like, which is actually really funny visually in and of itself. All right, go ahead.
To looking simian, well, there's a reason. Because we are primates. That's why there's so many comparisons to humans and monkeys and to apes. Because
George Bush.
Some people look more like it than others. There are some white people that look more like apes than other white people. There are some black people that look more ape-like than other black people. I look ape-like. With my shirt off, in my birthday suit, I look like a gorilla. I mean, I don't have to work out. I got big chest, big arms, big legs. I'm bow-legged. My feet are flat. My dad is somewhat simian looking too. It's just the way it is. And I'm proud of it. But
I'm proud of it.
I mean, this whole thing is just absolutely ridiculous. I'm hairy like an ape.
Look at this.
By the way, I'm proud of it. Women don't seem to mind. They seem to like it.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah, dude.
I would say that I look more simian than most black people. But this mental illness of political correctness to say that we don't all, at one way or another, look simian is just a complete joke. I mean, it's like species of horses. Does a mule look a lot like a horse, even though it's not a horse? Does a donkey look a lot like a horse? It's a different species, but it's in the same family.
Giraffes.
You know what's so messed up about that is like there's a lot of things to defend those individual claims if it wasn't so intentionally. Like, if you just like, we're going to strip all of American history, what everybody knows a racist joke like that means, and every single person knows that's coming from. If you junk all of that, it's like, yeah, actually all humans, like, yeah, that's true. Those are our closest relatives. Fair enough. And he just turns.
I guess we know
my dad still looks at me.
It's almost like confessional, too, when he talks about his dad being so he's like, you know what? My old man.
And I'm proud of it. Yeah, like his dad being like, hey, asshole, could you not bring me into your defense of that racist woman on Twitter? You think maybe leave the family out of it?
This is a good way to register the sort of lack of power of the creationist crazy force audience now.
No, that is a very, very evolution-friendly argument right there. There's no like, why aren't monkeys having humans today? None of that in that one. Okay, is this an image or a video? Yeah. Okay, North Korean officials are in the United States. I just want to say, look, I think that what's happening with North Korea is the only remotely positive conceivable thing to come out of this administration, other than, of course, their tremendous help of the growth of the Patreon, YouTube political talk show market. But that being said, and they should do it, and it's not about, one can negate the other in reality, but I mean, even though they did this disastrous, stupid, hellscape, moronic, dishonest thing, taking an axe to the Iran deal, the notion that you could step out of a deal that was working by every single objective metric to appease maybe a war lobby, but at the very least one that wants to just reify absolutely dangerous dynamics and dysfunctional dynamics in the Middle East with regards to Israel and Saudi Arabia and that regional balance, then you could turn around, and you should turn around, but have, like, if you can sit and hang out and negotiate with the North Koreans, you could do it with anybody. And you should. But I just want to keep reiterating that if you went after Iran, which doesn't even hold a candle on some of the issues that you get with North Korea, it really proves the point of how utterly ideological, reckless, insane, and demented the Iran move is. And that being said, here's Mike Pompeo meeting with a North Korean official as this process sort of slowly, apparently, seems to be moving forward.
How did things go at dinner last night? Mr. Secretary, what do you need to accomplish in today's meeting?
Well, there it is. Now, while all of this is happening, while Donald Trump is talking about going and having fun with the victims of school shootings, and while some handful of weird commentators are obsessively focused with Russia for good and for ill, there is actually literally a country which is rising in every way, shape, and form. And this is just some crazy video that was released by the People's Republic of China of aqua drones. So I just want to watch this. This is like aqua drones in formation in the sea, like this unbelievable.
I hadn't seen anything like this before.
I have not seen anything like this either. And I just, like, while this is happening, what's happening here is that there's like goobers on like social media being like, Tesla's gonna save us.
And Dinesh, you can go free.
And Dinesh, you're free. Meanwhile, China has literally aqua drones sailing in formation underneath like beautiful martial music. And I'm recalled that apparently in ancient China, they called their foreign policy barbarian management. And I think we might be heading towards that time again.
New in the line of barbarian
A new line of barbarian management. The aqua drone. while idiots in the United States pardon Dinesh D'Souza. Coming to you after the 2020 election, actually. Yeah, that is crazy footage.
I mean, if I have to be killed by some new piece of technology, it might as well be one as cool as that.
An aquadrone boat.
Oh, yeah.
Better that than a fucking Tesla.
Good hypothetical question there.
Trying to jet ski away from one of those things.
Oh, well, definitely not a Tesla.
That needs to be in a Bourne movie.
That
Better
does
than,
need to
like-
be in a Bourne movie. Definitely not a Tesla.
Like a self-driving bus or something.
Yeah, right. Like, yeah, we managed to deploy 40 of these with a government grant for $10 billion, and now I'm going to go do a TED talk and get blown on Twitter by a bunch of fucking morons. You're calling from a 886 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, this is Chris calling from Taiwan.
Hey, what's going on, Chris?
Well, as a resident of Taiwan, those aqua drones are pretty frightening. But other than
Fair
that,
enough.
they're fine.
Fair enough. They are actually frightening.
Word.
But it was pretty amazing to look at.
Yeah. Yeah. So your guest, Eric Levitz, was great. That was a really enlightening interview. And on the subject of unions and organizing workers, I want to make a comment about that as it relates to my personal experience right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm an English teacher here in Taiwan, and at my school, my colleagues and I are currently engaged in contract renegotiation for the school year, the new school year that starts in the fall. And now we don't have a union, right? So we're being called into the boss's office one at a time, and engaging in sort of separate individual negotiations, which isn't ideal, right?
Right.
But our industry, the ESL industry, doesn't easily lend itself to formal unions or lasting worker organizations because the turnover is so high. I mean, most people don't stick around for more than a year or two, if that. And even the ones that do sort of live with the security of knowing that they could have a different job next week if they ever wanted to. So we don't have a union, and we couldn't, we would have a really hard time organizing one. However, during this contract renegotiation process, we've been spending a lot of time just talking in the break room, talking to one another about what the boss is offering and, what the boss is trying to demand of each of us. And so we've talked a lot collectively about what we all should or should not be willing to accept. And so these conversations have helped us sort of come to an informal consensus about what we're willing to say yes or no to.
That's awesome.
And so this isn't an argument against unions. If anything, it's like a lament that we have to do this organizing informally and like without the institutional protection of a union. But it has occurred to me that even short of a formal union, there are still ways for colleagues in the workplace to sort of form a sense of solidarity with one another and deal with the boss as a collective, with common interests.
Yeah.
And, it strikes me this might be particularly relevant to people who work in restaurants or coffee houses or
definitely
or like other places where the workforce is really transient and informal union organizing is really hard.
Right.
So I just wanted to hear what anything you would have to say about that.
I think it sounds great. Cool. Makes total sense.
It reminds me of when we had Jane McAlevey on last time.
Yeah.
Yeah, noted.
Thanks, brother. Good luck. Keep us posted on that.
Take care.
Thank you.
All right.
You're calling from a 929 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from? 929. Hello? No, cannot. Sorry. You're calling from a 626 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Yes, my government name is William, and I'm calling from the Los Angeles area.
What's going on, William?
Well, I don't know. Like, it seems to be a lot of pretty good information going around today, and I was just wondering if you guys would be interested in either some tactics or perspective.
Interested in what?
Tactics or perspective.
Tactics or why don't you give us a little tactics? We're pretty tight on time, so give us a little bit of tactics.
Okay, well, I'm sure I'm not the only person to think of things like this, but when dealing, say, like with supremacist groups, like some nonviolent ways to either kind of cause concern is to, like when they have rallies, right? Like sometimes it doesn't hurt to actually like get information on, because they obviously have to arrive there in transportation. They have switched up every now and then by, going in mass, but they still have to meet up in certain places, and it doesn't hurt to actually find out where some of these people go, because they regularly employ that same tactic to try to follow important people to where they stay.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, you gotta be careful, like, of what we co-sign on. But I think, like, yeah, there's nothing wrong with any like public organizing of racist groups of people. They should be embarrassed and counter-protested. I agree with you completely, man.
Yeah, and if you can get info on who they are, also helpful.
Yeah, all in moderation, because they obviously have the authorities on their side. So I really wouldn't want to go too in depth in it, but and here's some perspective. Like
I actually
how you guys
real quick. We're real tight, so just real quick.
I'll make this one real quick though, just so it could be confirmed. You know how they always say like with the job applications for minorities, if you have a like black sounding name, you're less likely to get called back than if you have a white. My name is overly Anglo, and I don't exactly sound like it, but I am black, and so I would tend to get a lot more callbacks, especially, if you were to go over my resume and what I put on my application.
Right.
And so I get calls, and, sometimes they almost want to hire me before the call is over. They're like, yeah, come in, drug test, this and that. And, of course, you're going to be early the next day or the day you agree to show up. Yeah. And so I'll be early, and they'll be like, can we help you? And it's like, yeah, I'm a little early. And they'll still be more confused. And then once I say, yeah, I'm William Barney, you guys asked me to come in. And then the look on their face changes, and they're like, oh. And all of a sudden it's kind of like, oh, well, we need you to come back in, or, they're just giving them, they're just going through the motions.
I've had this conversation with other black men who have like, whatever, quote unquote white sounding names, whatever the hell that actually even means. And they've had exactly the same. I've heard exactly the same experience. Yep.
Yeah, I'm a heterozygote, or heterozygous,
No.
So people can get kind of confused, but I prefer to consider myself black. There's nothing wrong with being black or anything. But keep in mind, this is with my applications having my high school principal as a reference, as well as the person who used to be the head of the school board, 4.1,
right,
undergrad, graduates, and it almost doesn't matter. I eventually got hired, working for the Navy, through a contractor, because at the unemployment office, the address was wrong, and I still found the place, and they just basically, they're like, oh, you know how to do that? I was like, any operating system, programming languages.
I do need to run, but I mean, it's depressing. It's disgusting. I've heard many versions of that story. I appreciate the call.
I mean,
it sucks.
It sucks to have to go through that and suspect and not know, right? That's not even something that I even have to consider. Why my
right.
You always have to suspect that.
Well, I remember when I went through the, I was like, well, it's Obama's America, and as a white man, it's not happening. But under Trump, if under Trump, if you're a white guy who can't get hired, I mean, whoa, I'm just playing. You're calling from a 266 area code. It sounds like a Skype call. What's up? I'm fast on these guys. You got to be ready. Calling from an 803 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hi, Michael Brook here from South Carolina. You're on the line. Hello?
Hello, what's up?
Hello. Hey, yeah. So I called because I was listening to you and Jamie's conversation earlier on progressive politics, and I guess I've been having a similar conversation with my friend. I guess how would you how like their problem with it is that they don't think it goes far enough, and so they want to, I guess, discount it altogether.
What do you mean?
And
What's it? What's it?
Just like I guess more specifically, like I was talking to them about Justice Democrats and our revolution and the races they had been winning in the midterms recently. Also, really sorry if my voice is shaky. This is the first time I've
no
ever
worries.
called in.
No worries. I mean, look, man. I guess I'll just reiterate. I mean, I think I've been saying it. I mean, I think that look, electoral politics is really important. And it does potentially create space. It's not sufficient. It's not a standalone. And I also think what I don't understand is like people get so wrapped up in the minutia. Like I just think it's actually, if you really don't want to put most of your political energy into electoral politics, then don't. Go out, vote for the lesser of two evils.
Now on the internet.
Go out and vote for the lesser of two evils. Go out and vote for the better candidate. Do your part. And then focus on whatever the hell else it is you want to focus on. It's not that complicated. Yeah, it's really not that complicated.
And
I think there's an element of this where it starts to become like lifestyle branding for people.
I understand that, and especially in like an internet age, there's room for plenty of both. But they just like my friend just like completely discounts it altogether, and like what would be the best way to
then you have to ask your friend, are they more interested in their self-branding and self-definition of being like self-consciously radical, or doing actual stuff to achieve things?
And as a lazy person, I read a lot of this as like a subconscious way of staying inactive.
Yeah.
So like you can't affect anything, so don't affect it.
Well, no. I mean, is your friend out there doing other things to build class power?
Not currently. They're in college, and also they just like and so they're like they have like a whole bunch of just like their own stuff to worry about, and like which is why I kind of understand. Don't understand. Like,
but dude, I think you just hit the nail on the head. Their own stuff to worry about. All this shit. It's so ironic. I've never heard. It's like there is a conspiracy between people who are like, there's some people who are like want to claim the mantle of a certain type of left politics, but really it's just like bougie politics, but they understand that branding of being liberal isn't as sexy as being like a socialist. So they want it, but they have no actual socialist analysis. And then there's other people who like are perfectionistic fantasy radicals who like nothing can ever meet whatever criteria they've generated in their heads. And there's like a conspiracy between these two archetypes because both of it like does not involve doing anything. And I hear these conversations and I almost never hear like, especially because I like the conversations, like we said earlier, like they're actually going to take place once some power is actually acquired. Like the idea that people are sitting around now being like, oh, I don't know, like, should all members of like the Revolutionary Central Committee be vegans or not? Like we should vote on that. Like, no, like shut the fuck up, get out there and fucking do shit, including vote, including involved in electoral politics. That matters. Sorry, period.
I mean, I think there's certainly a good faith critique to be made of electoral politics efficacy in terms of bringing about socialism.
But
actual socialism.
Yeah, but
and this is something we talked about. I mean, we talk about it a lot on the Antifada. We talk about it especially on episode 5, where we have an actual, a very nice, friendly discussion between someone taking the social democratic position, Sean taking the furthest left position, and me kind of in the middle as usual, trying to have it both ways.
But
it's the final piece of the puzzle.
But that's not even what's in dispute. Like I would never say, like, I'm not saying that I don't think that electoral politics will take us to like maybe not even the social conditions right now aren't even in place to take us to social democracy. Like that's not even the debate.
That's what
the debate is, what do you do to ameliorate the conditions you're in now for people that are seriously suffering, and then create even the slightest bit of opening to possibly addressing longer term problems. And there's no realistic, reality-based analysis of that situation that does not include electoral politics. It's just delusional.
I disagree. I don't think it's delusional. I think there are lots of
what are the
plenty of
what are
pros
the
and
pressure
cons on both sides.
What are the
and,
pressure?
like,
but
we've
what are the pressure points? What are the real paths to actually doing those things that are real and taking place today? Not could be, but like actually.
We might disagree on the horizon that we're going for as well. I think there are a lot of, we're having this conversation a lot in DSA right now about what we should be using our resources on, how we should be engaging with electoral politics, what we want out of it, what is the smartest thing to be doing tactically. Because most of us agree on ideology, actually. Most of us have some sort of anti-capitalist, socialist ideology that goes beyond social democracy. And there are some things that are good, like lots of things are good, lots of things will help people, but that doesn't necessarily mean we should be doing all of those things. Like one example, I don't know, should we be canvassing? Should we be supporting more progressive Democrats who are not socialists as a socialist organization? I don't think so. And
why?
We haven't been doing it yet.
But why not? Like if
because
people,
that is the job of liberal organizations.
But if
it's not
people,
the job of socialists.
But if people want to do that, and it's an intervention point,
think
why the hell not encourage them, especially to associate
people
the
can
socialist,
do it.
A socialist brand with a win? It doesn't make sense to me.
We have limited resources, so we can't.
People's
do
canvassing time
everything.
is not a
and
limited
look,
resource.
Would you? Okay.
What were you going to say? Just real quick, Matt.
Well, I just think like it's always the Democratic part of the Democratic.
Democratic Socialist Party was literally created by Michael Harrington to be like an entryist effort inside the Democratic Party. Like that is literally the historical
roots of it. It has changed a
lot
lot since then. Otherwise, I would not be wasting my time with it at all.
But my problem with like the LibCom critique of like Jacobin and Novara is that the whole thing
has nothing to do with what's happening.
It reads Jacobin as if it's saying that electoral politics is going to save us from climate change. And I've been reading Jacobin for a long time, and I've never got that impression from Jacobin. It's a bad faith reading of social democrats.
There is nobody in that orbit, Jacobin, me, anybody, making any of the arguments that are claimed about us. But conversely, there's a lot of questions that are never answered by people who make bad faith accusations of us. Like, what are you actually talking about? How do you actually acquire power? What are the actual plans? What's actually happening? And to not use like an opportunity to create a little bit of space with a little bit of an improvement, because even like if we had Hillary president.
Where do you draw the line though? Like,
that's another question.
Would you tell socialists to go out and canvass if it was like John McCain versus Donald Trump?
But that's a completely different hypothetical
No,
question.
it's not.
No, it literally is. That's not on tap.
You do draw the line somewhere, though, in terms of what's actually going to help at all.
But that's not on tap.
If you make too many compromises in terms of what you will support in order to get some modicum of power, it ceases to be tactically advantageous to any kind of working class
What
movement.
if you thought the DSA could help Hillary win Wisconsin?
That would be a good use of resources.
Plenty of individuals who were in the DSA went out and canvassed for Hillary.
But do you think
but
it would be
as an
wise to say
no?
No.
No, you have to draw the line somewhere.
But draw the line, do you discourage it?
Why? Because
we're trying to do something here.
Our project. It's not.
No, it's part of the project because Hillary being president allows for more openings and less human suffering, which is actually advantageous to the possibility of the project.
Okay, so you draw the line in a different place than I do.
But it's not a line drawing. It's not a personal moral exercise. It's looking at the landscape and making the smartest interventions possible. And these abstractions about where the lines are and all of this is not politics. It's personal moral feeling.
I disagree.
No, but
there are good faith disagreements between leftists on what is going to be tactically helpful to win in the end.
No, that's not. No, it's yeah. We can. That's fine.
We can I know we disagree on it, and it's fine.
And we can disagree on it, and it's fine. No, the caller was wise. Ivanka Tinkles, I'm struggling, MR Crew, trying to keep a close friend of mine from the dark web's BS. I've defended her from the onslaught of Sam Harris and Charles Murray. But now I'm trying to defend her. Well, from Jordan Peterson and Dave Rubin, she went to a show on their tour, and she brought the 12 Steps book from Peterson. I'm surprised to have to fight this crap from such a close friend. I wonder who else is struggling with this and how these people are really separating friends from families with their toxicity. Why are they so accessibility? She's a political amateur, but it was so easily picked up because they validate people's They validate what people think are truisms in ways that appear deceptively sophisticated. Brendan? Oh, you're just hanging out there. You look like you're like on the mic.
Brendan's still surprised it's a woman.
Yeah, I was.
That is actually a little surprising. TYT covered a Harvard study yesterday about Republican judge racism. Basically, it showed how they would pick up minorities at least 3 months longer than white people. I hope the Jimmy Doors of the world see how important elections actually are. I think Matt's preference for a competition in the NBA shows his inner secret capitalism love. A group of super teams dominating the NBA, leaving every other team fighting crumbs. Not good. No, this is where you don't understand. There's a lot of areas like going to a sporting event is like a great example of like indulging the fascism that we all have in us.
Actually,
we need different pressure valves for different parts of our personality.
He's right. To maintain my principles, I think that if the Warriors get out ahead, they should give Kevin Durant to the Cavaliers. I think this should all be sort of normalized and balanced.
Okay, I don't agree. The hell yeah. I hear. I'm curious. Any thoughts on this Godard film weekend, particularly Jamie's? If she's been to, I've seen it. Would be up her alley.
What?
The Godard film weekend. I don't know.
I have not seen it.
Secret identity politics. I hear Trump's going to pardon Harry Nilsson, Jesus, Castor from Troy, Face Off, and Venus Williams next week. I don't. Why? What? There's a problem with Venus Williams.
It's a Kardashian joke.
Okay. Let's see. Mitch from Houston. Trump is pardoning Jeunesse D'Souza. Blah, blah. Leftist European.
And Blagojevich, maybe.
That I like. I think it's kind of insane that Blagojevich is still in jail. Leftist European. Guess who just did an interview with Russian-backed journalists about Syrian gas attacks and the white helmets? Jimmy Dore. Have a nice day. Fuck. Jesus.
I think they should embed him in Syria.
Yeah, they should. Jimmy should go. He should go to Syria. And you're doing a lot of things for your fucking foreign policy. RoboCat. What do you think of Hillary Clinton, Bashar al-Assad? Isn't she a fucking sellout? Because it would be awesome. To me, when you drop, I don't necessarily agree that you drop the sarin gas or bunker bombs on people, but when you do it, it feels authentic. But Hillary, she wasn't fucking authentic.
This is true.
Yeah. Hillary was not. No, have you ever heard Assad talk? He's a real weird, like pussy voice. He's like, she was not. So the people of Syria.
He's Syrian Jordan Peterson.
Yeah. Ethnically cleansing the Sunni neighborhoods is an antidote to chaos. Clean your room. I just think of each individual Syrian. All right, we're probably flying too close to the sun there. Robot Cat. It's not intellectual dark web. It's the pseudo-intellectual dark web. Trey, check out Joe Rogan's defense of Roseanne's racist comments. I sent you an email with the link. Jesus Christ, thank you. Man, Rogan is really making it a lot harder to do. You're just like,
it'd be tough to be Rogan if all your intellectual, your constellation of intellectuals is all sort of going on fire.
I know. All right. We have time for one more call. I'm sorry I can't get to everybody. You're calling from a 607 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hi, guys. This is Clay from Athens, across the water from Cairo.
Wow.
Excellent show today. I'm champing at the bit to talk. I've been champing at the bit to talk to you and biting my tongue not to go off on tangents. But just one tangent in terms of drawing the line, in terms of your review of the socialist history. What a different world would be if Trotsky had blocked with Buchanan and they had pushed the proletarian revolution west instead of descending into civil war and giving us Stalinism.
Right.
But in any case, I'm gonna presume to give you some strategic advice.
Okay.
There's I don't know how much time you spend on it, but watching MSNBC or PBS, but it's just become a playground for the likes of George Wills and David Brooks. I mean, they're on all sorts of shows, and all these crypto fascists are, they smell the blood in the water. They think that, I don't know what they think. Either Trump will be reelected and render the third season of Handmaid's Tale bland and redundant,
right?
Or we'll get to share a firing line with David Brooks and George Will. But they really think that Donald Trump is not going to have a second round, and these crypto fascists are positioning themselves. They're doing this double talk where they say, oh well, Trump is an idiot, but look at all the good he's done. Look at the tax cuts. Look at all these.
Yeah, no, I hear you.
Things.
So yeah,
And,
yeah. But
wait a second. No, I've got a criticism of you guys. You spend all your time talking about these peripheral gadflies like Rubin and Peterson and Harris and even poor Jimmy Dore. And you should be, you should have a special segment on these hack, people like David Brooks and George Will and George.
Let me. What did you say?
Yeah.
What did you say, Brendan?
You just said it yourself. They're hacks.
Well, it's not just that they're hacks. It's that. I'll explain to you because there's a little bit of. Especially. Sam is in a hybrid world to some extent, but in the market that we're in. There is not, as I have had multiple people say, I like you and I like Sam Harris. And I thought what he said about this, Islam thing was, what's wrong with that, right? Like, what's wrong with a thought experiment about nuking the Middle East or whatever? Jimmy Dore inside this ecosystem is an active promoter of profoundly stupid and not strategic, political planning and advice. No. Let me explain. I understand. No, that's not true. That's not true. That's not true. But I'm explaining to you, in our world, they have infinitely more followers and interest than a David Brooks or George Will. There's no 20, 30-something YouTube podcast listener who has ever approached me with my thoughts about David Brooks. They all have thoughts and are influenced by Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris, and that world. In the ecosystem we're in, those are the primary right-wing voices. That's what we got to deal with. Those other figures are peripheral in the platform we're on.
I think that's the same kind of argument. I'm sorry, I don't know the names of your co-hosts, but the Democratic Socialist. Kim, is that your
I'm
name?
Jamie.
Yeah, it's Kim Jong-un.
You talk about these. You can talk. You have your DSA meetings, and then you have to operate in a larger context, and that's what.
But we're not. We're literally It's totally different. It's totally different. It's totally different. We're literally in an ecosystem where those are the main competition, and I'm telling you. For my specific audience, I share way more audience with the people you mentioned than David Brooks or George Will. When I make fun of those people, which I do from time to time, people either are like, oh, right, David Brooks, he's an idiot. That's fun. Or they sometimes are like, who the hell is George Will? Who's David French? They have no idea who they are.
Right. Well,
in my world, those guys are much more important. So it's a better use of time. Appreciate the call, man. Thanks. All right, that was the last call of the day. We'll do a few more IMs, then we're out of here. Thames Darwin. Today I learned that it's official position of the American left that white people are of a particular mindset. I had no idea. Did I miss a mailing from George Soros? That's normally how I get my updates, but maybe I'm already said too much. That's a good point. You probably already have. Let's see. Jonathan Armistead. Mike, last week You couldn't remember the name of the white guy who stood with the two black athletes who gave the black power salute at the 68 Olympics. His name is Peter Norman. There's a great documentary about him called Salute. I actually noticed that NOI Obama has his photo in the background of his cartoon. Yes, he does. Is he one of the good white devils? I've been thinking a lot about him lately because Norman actually helped bring poverty component to the protest as a form of intersectionality. Does anyone in studio know of anything, of anyone doing work to help overlap Black Lives Matter and Me Too protests? I see similar obstacles for people involved specifically in denial, but I don't know if anyone has made the connection. I had a falling out with a pal last year who said that BLM shouldn't support the doctor dragged off of the U.S. flight because the guy was Asian and not part of the agenda. I see. Jay Tingle, wait. Matt, which JFK conspiracy theories do you believe? There are hundreds.
Well, that's the thing. I just think one of them is probably true. But I think I would stick
Which
to
one,
like
dude? Come on.
Well, Alan Dulles. It's been a couple of years since I've been really deep into this, but Alan Dulles is maybe the highest up person that I think could have known something. But I think the CIA in general, like I think some pretty shady shit went on there. It's the CIA, the mafia, and right-wing Cubans. That's
So actually, you really basically are like in the Oliver Stone camp.
yeah. I'm a holistic person.
That's basically the movie.
I'm in the Alexander Coburn camp. I think it was Alexander Coburn who said this. It seems like something he would say when, everyone's bending over backwards to try to come up with conspiracy theories why this radical leftist did not kill JFK. He's like, why can't we just admit that we got one?
Well, the reason is because there's a famous picture of Oswald with two different left publications, and they have a similar split to the one we have. And why would a regular leftist pose with both of those unless he's some sort of CIA plant?
Clearly, you've researched this more than me.
I was going to do a podcast on it, then Trump won.
And then I'm going to release all the documents.
It's going to be too depressing to go there every week.
Yeah. Sure you want to take on that emotional burden? By the way, we're going to drill in the Great Lakes. Nick from Manitoba. Hey, Michael, great interview today. I wonder if the fact that the emergence of unions in America predates the new left-right split has played a big role in unions being way more popular during the 20th century. About Lula and could violence have secured his position against the coup? Are you all talking about citizen using violence and protest to protect Lula, or the Lula government using the military or something to do so? Well, no, we were talking about Lula in power could have done more to, as an example, break up media monopolies and deal with policing and military issues in Brazil potentially. And yeah, during the instance where there were people surrounding him at the union headquarters, maybe if there was a sort of mass, not necessarily violent, but just any kind of sort of like mass public. There was, but one that was bigger, potentially it could have prevented something. Lastly, Michael, when you're talking about disgusting, myopic, neoliberal trust fund baby grotesque scumbags, one or two adjectives suffices. Stay sweet, MR Beauties, but I like to pile them on.
That's what you think.
Yeah, that's right. That's your perspective.
No
And,
gratuitousness from Michael anymore.
Yeah, I don't do, but I like gratuitous. Gratuitous is part of my core brand proposition. Really cool. Michael, or maybe Jamie, are you going to Left Forum this weekend?
I am not. I will be at a bar mitzvah in Texas, actually. Like the opposite of Left Forum.
It's pretty brave of you to come down to Texas. Let's see. The final IM of the day. I'm sorry, guys. We just can't read all of IMs anymore. There's just so many. So many good IMs. Well, I hope this is true. This is from Jimmy Durr. Trump is going to commute the sentence of ex-Illinois Governor Blagojevich. They've probably been caught selling government positions. There's a semi-credible claim of the FBI acting improperly with Blago, so he can say they did the same to him. We're in full-blown banana republic, but at least
Been there.
But at least we have great podcasts. See you guys tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth